Retired contractor. I've built about 70, I've been involved in about 70 rainwater collection systems, either designing and building them, just building them, or repairing something that's already there. And this is actually a 2-hour presentation, so I have to speak really quickly. No, I cut it way back, but I teach a class on rainwater collection systems design, and this is taken from that. You know, and I realized as I watched the other speakers here try to advance slides while using a pointer and holding a mic, we all need 3 hands. Okay, so what we're going to talk about first is the low-cost measures, the things you do before you spend a boatload of money on a rainwater collection system, how to determine your demand, how to think about how much water you actually collect, and then all these different elements of the rainwater collection system. And this little icon in the corner will cue you into the next topic. So when we go from roof to gutter and so on, you'll see that icon. There it is. These are all the things you do before you spend a lot of money on a rainwater collection system. And actually, Cora, Paul, our water masters, Karen, everybody's already talked about this, but it bears repeating. That's how much water you collect per acre, right? So for every inch of rain, you get 27,000 gallons per acre. And if anyone doesn't know what an acre foot is, big number. So that's the water that you actually manage if you think about it. And if it's running off your land, you want to stop it because it's yours. Well, it's the state's, but you get to control it. So these are pictures similar to what Karen was showing earlier. Things you can do to keep the water on your land. There's a bunch of these in Ashland. If you see the parking lots on Lithia Way, they all flow into things like this. It's a great way to keep water doing something useful for us. And then, of course, native species, drought tolerant and fire adapted or fire resistant if you're going to plant something. So this is a fun number. If you hire Karen to do some landscape design for you, and you hire work to do some grading for you, and you go to Plant Oregon or Shooting Star, spend $2,000 on plants and seeds, and then you spend $1,000 on an irrigation system, you're $5,000 out of pocket. If you divide that by that big bunch of water that you get per acre, you're looking at less than a penny a gallon. And that's what it costs to put in a rainwater collection system. So it's a big difference. Okay, so designing for your needs. What do you want to use water for? Let's go around. What are people looking to use water for? Gardening? Garden. Anybody fire? Wildlife? Anybody else? Drinking, okay. Potable water, I'm going to have one slide on that. That's a complicated topic. Another question, how much rainwater do you receive, or how much precipitation do you receive? Around the room? I'm 13 inches.
18. 36.
36, I want to live where you live. 40, oh my God.
15, 18.
Okay, so Jackson County, and I don't have one of these graphs or maps for Josephine County, but because of our topography, we have a huge variation in our water. So if you know those numbers, how much rainwater you receive in a year, and you know the pattern in which we generally receive it. Most of our rainwater falls in the wintertime, but we don't need it then. We need it in the summertime. And that's really what a rainwater collection system does, is it lets you use the water on demand because you really can't pull it back out of the soil when it's already in the ground. That, by the way, is from Ashland's North Mountain Park Nature Center, where they have a rain gauge and they have these graphs they print once a year. So in Jackson County, for permit reasons, and I'm going to kind of blast through this, you do not need a permit for a rainwater collection system unless it's for potable use, you're going to bring it into the house to flush toilets or use it for cooling in some way, in which case you need a plumbing permit. If you're going to have a pump pushing the water to a point of use, you need an electrical permit. And if it's over 5,000 gallons in size per tank, so if you have two 5,000 gallon tanks side by side, you still don't need a permit until it gets to be so big the county building department wants to see how much land you're actually using and if it's on a slope and things like that. And then if it's in a floodplain. Otherwise, you don't need a permit to build a rainwater collection system. So if you can build something that's fairly small or use small tanks, and you can use gravity to pressurize your water, that's the best way to go. Oh, this is Cora's slide. I didn't know what she was going to say about her program, but Cora is an awesome resource for things like grant writing assistance and actually, do you still have money for tanks?
I do. I have a stormwater rebate, and definitely the most popular program is rainwater collection. So yeah, I didn't even get into that with my focus on the other stuff.
Talk to Cora after today, or afterwards, after I'm finished here. Okay, so another version of this rainwater catchment systems overview. You need a roof, you need gutters, downspout, some way to get the water from the downspout into the tank, and then a way to push the water to its point of use. This surprises a lot of people, but the footprint of your roof is what counts. It's not the shape of your roof or the square surface area of the roof in terms of the amount of material up there. It's actually the footprint. So all three of these roofs collect the same amount of water. And rather than get up on a ladder with a tape measure, go to Google Earth to measure your roof size. Because there's a drop and drag tool in the corner, upper left side, I think it still is. And it'll give you the dimensions of your roof, which you can calculate and get your square footage, if you don't already know your roof size. And the type of roof that we recommend you use if you're going to pull water off is going to be steel roofing. Painted steel or galvanized steel would be the best because it has the least amount of stuff on it. You'll have dust particles and pollen and things like that, but you don't have leaves and needles and moss growing on it because it's too smooth. And so you get the cleanest water off of a steel roof. Tile is an option, but it has a lot of nooks and crannies, so it's going to collect more material, which could wash into your water supply. Asphalt shingle is probably the least desirable, but still okay for a lot of things like irrigation. I don't think you're allowed to drink it, or you shouldn't drink it. I'm not sure if livestock likes it or not, but a lot of the systems I've put in have asphalt shingle roofs, but they also have this problem with debris collecting in the gutter. Anybody get snow? Yeah, I wish I did. How much water per inch is in about 10 or 12 inches of snow? I'm from Wisconsin. I know the answer to this question. It depends on how wet the snow is, but it's usually about an inch of water for 10 inches of snow. So if you want to collect every last drop of water from your roof and you get snow 2 or 3 times a year, you want to put on these snow brakes because they keep the snow from sliding off your roof where you can't use it again. Now, gutters are the next thing on the system you need to know about. And I used to talk about gutters and fascia and brackets and things, and people stop me and say, that's a foreign language, so I have a picture here. There's a board that runs behind this gutter that attaches to your rafter tails. And that's what you have to hang the gutter on. And you slope that gutter, depending on how tall that board is. You can get more slope out of a taller board. But you have brackets, straps, nails, screws, things like that, that hold that gutter onto the fascia. And then the water flows in the direction that you slope the gutter to a drop, where it drops into a downspout. This gets a little complicated, but in our area, this hasn't been updated for a while, but in our area, there's something called the rainfall intensity for the 60-minute, 100-year event, which is basically the maximum amount of rainwater that we could expect to receive in any given hour. And that usually happens every 10 or 20 or 30 years. But with changing climate, that may happen more frequently. But right now we're at about 1.3 inches per hour. And if you're designing your own system and you're going to be using a barn or a factory building or some very large surface, you're going to want to consult this next chart. So you know your catchment area, you've got that figure in mind, and you consult this resource, which has also been updated, but the tables haven't changed. And it tells us that if you're in a 2 inch per hour, 1.3 is under 2 inches, your surface area can be drained by a 5-inch diameter gutter if you slope it at 1/8 of an inch. And if you slope it at 1/4 of an inch, you can drain a larger surface area. So if you go to the box stores or if you talk to the folks who install gutters, they're already going to be doing a 5-inch gutter because that's what most people use on a residential structure. But if you're going to be putting a gutter on a warehouse or a barn, you might be up in the 6 and 7-inch category because it's a much larger surface. Picture of what happens when we don't slope a gutter. And this isn't necessarily bad, it's just that you have to take it out of your water supply if you're going to drink it or if you're going to run it through drip emitters because it'll clog the emitters. But the sloping of your gutter is influenced a little bit by your roof size, as we saw in that prior slide, but it's also influenced by how many downspouts you have per length of gutter. If it's only one and you've got a 100-foot long gutter, you're not going to have the water evacuate as quickly as if you have 2 or 3. Fascia height is a factor, and then aesthetics. A lot of people don't like gutter sloping because it makes it look like their building is tilted or that their contractor did a poor job installing it. This is the potable water slide. So Oregon is governed by actually Appendix K, but Appendix K is 1 page of details to send you everywhere else in the building code, which is useless because most of us don't have a copy of the plumbing code. Beautifully, Appendix M, which Appendix K replaced, has everything on 3 pages. That's why I like it. But you have a minimum slope. Generally go with at least a 1/16 of an inch. That's kind of the minimum for water to run. Okay, excluding things from the gutter. We want to keep leaves out. Why else do we want to keep leaves out besides they get into our water tank? Anybody? Well, well, you would if you were to get up on your roof to keep leaves up. But why else do we want leaves out of our thank you, fire? They burn. So you can use these strainers. That's one option. And that'll at least keep the leaves not out of your gutter, but from getting into your tank. And I've been in a lot of tanks where I've cleaned out 6 and 8 inches of sludge, which was decomposed leaf debris. Or you could use some of the less expensive screens that you can purchase at the box stores. But I can't recommend them because they either are too large, the holes allow for leaves and needles to still get through, or they function like a tea bag where the material deteriorates, gets stuck in there, and as the water flows through, it comes out brown on the other end. So what I recommend people do, if they can afford it, really not that expensive, is these stainless steel gutter screens. There's like 6 or 7 manufacturers of these things. The one that I use a lot is, I think it's called Easy On Gutter Screens, and you can get them at Costco. But they're inflammable, durable. I think I first put these on 10 years ago to some project I did, and I think they're still there. Like Rourke, I don't get that many callbacks. I hope I never get a callback. Minimal maintenance, they're like 1/64 of an inch square mesh. I think that's 30 microns, so they keep a lot of stuff out. Little bit of a downside, if water comes down the roof in a hurry, because it's like an A-frame or a really steep slope, the water can shoot out over these until capillarity pulls it out down into the gutter. But it's a really pretty small price to pay for not having stuff inside your gutters during fire season.
What keeps leaves from collecting on those and doing the tea bag thing that you talked about?
It's hard to see with this picture, but there's nothing really for anything to catch on. So wind will blow debris off. You can brush that off. You can take a jet of water on it, what's called an umbrella, a nozzle that you put, it's on a telescoping. Can you get here? Oh, it only works right there. So you can walk along underneath your gutter with a telescoping water hose nozzle that points downward and blasts it off. I generally don't take it off at all. It works out pretty well.
So it's not
Leaf
concave?
blower would do it if you want to be up on the roof.
It's not concave like it looks?
It's slightly concave, just to keep the water from shooting out over it.
And what are the parallel lines? Is that something down in the gutter, or is that just up in the mesh itself?
Yeah, it's a corrugation in the mesh itself.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's just this brand. I think there are other brands that don't do this. I've got some samples on the back from a company I've never used. They just sent me a box of samples, but it's the same material.
What's the name of it?
I want to say Easy On Gutter Screens. Yes, Rich?
Jim, the stainless steel mesh that you installed several years ago on my woodshed, it's like self-maintaining. Like you say, the wind comes along between the metal roof and that stainless steel, just the stuff disappears before I get a chance to rake it.
Lucky you. Okay, we're going to move on to downspouts. This is another one of those charts where if you just rely on what's available at the box stores or you talk to the folks who install gutters, they're going to install what most residences, roofs under 3,000 square feet, which is what most of us have, are going to be just fine for carrying the volume of water from the gutter to the point of storage. And so you take that 1.3 inches per hour, you take your catchment area, and you consult this chart. And I've highlighted the part most of us are concerned about. It tells me that a 3-inch downspout, that's the diameter of the downspout, can carry 67 gallons of water per minute from a 6,400 to 3,200 square foot roof. So that's pretty good. So we generally don't have to do much design work here. Downspout screens. This is actually a picture of Rich's downspout screen. This is one that was really low tech, but I believe it's still in use. It has to be changed out periodically. The one on the right is self-cleaning in the sense it's angled so debris will flow off of it or bounce off of it, but it should still be cleaned out periodically. It's elevated to keep backsplash from getting into your water supply if it were for potable water, and also because if you've ever watched a male dog pee, 12 to 14 inches or higher is better. Then there's what to do about this kind of stuff. First flush diverters. Now, I'm not sure what Cora's take on first flush diverters are, but if you're not, you're required to use them for drinking water. But for almost anything else, you generally don't need them. But I'm going to go through them anyway. How much to flush is the first question. And it depends on your roof and how close you are to freeways, pollen sources, things like that. If it's going to be, if you get a lot of dirt and dust and debris on your roof between rainstorms, which again, in our area, it starts raining in November. Every couple of weeks we get another downpour. There's really not a big pollen source in our area until right about now. So you can almost disengage your first flush device after the first rain because it doesn't get a lot of dirt on the roof between now and between when it first starts to rain and right about now. But if you were to install a first flush, this is how you size it. It's between 1 and 4 gallons per 100 square feet. So a 1,000 square foot roof would have up to 40 gallons of first flush. And the way these things work is pretty simple. That ball is down here when this tank, which is just a pipe, is empty. And as the water flows out of the gutter, down here the ball floats. And when it's full, it seals at the top, and then water then continues into your tank. And that's how almost all the first flush diversion systems out there work. And you can convert pipes into first flush tanks if you just know how many gallons are per linear foot of pipe. You can just make a pipe out of it, or make a tank out of a pipe. And the asterisk means that there's a company called Rain Harvest Systems that makes this kit for those size pipes, 3-inch and 4-inch. They used to make one for 12-inch, but they stopped doing it. They're now making a quadruple 4-inch pipe kit for to substitute for the 12-inch pipe. So there's examples of some first flush devices. There's that spaghetti strainer and a very long tank made with 3-inch PVC and then switching to ABS pipe. And then here's just a short one on the side of a building. Another very short one, probably just 5 or 6 gallons total from a very large building. And then the one hanging on the side of this trellis post. And the water drips out of it at the end of the rainfall event, so it's empty and ready for the next charge. Another downside of these is they can freeze. And in a climate where you get 20-degree nights, you can have this pipe frozen solid and possibly cracked. So if you have a situation where the pipe could be vulnerable to freezing, you probably don't want to have it suspended in the air like that. Or you want to make sure you empty it before it freezes. Now, I like these systems, but this fitting is no longer available. However, they make this quad 4-pipe system that replaces this. And the idea is that you put this pipe underground, your downspouts drop the water into it, that ball floats up into a joint right in here, and then any clean water then goes towards your tank. And you can bury these, so you don't have to worry about them freezing. And I've installed probably a dozen of these, and they just, no one has to worry about anything cracking. But again, I wouldn't fuss with the first flush device unless you're drinking the water, because plants generally don't care if there's bird poop dissolved in the water, and that's what most of us are using our water for. Okay, conveyance pipes. So water can get into your tank either through a wet conveyance or a dry conveyance. And the wet conveyance means that whenever it's not raining, the pipe is still wet, there's still water in it. Dry conveyance is when it's not raining, the pipe is dry. And you can actually have wet conveyances that are dry because you can put like a pinhole drain right here so it drains out without compromising the water level in the tank. But if you're using an asphalt shingle roof, the particulate will clog the pinhole and it won't drain. So best to use with a steel roof. Wrong hand, I need 3 hands. So again, wet conveyances are generally buried, dry conveyances are almost always up in the air, and you protect your forehead by putting them on a trellis. And they also need to be supported every 4 feet, and this makes it easy to do that. Another one of those complicated charts. If you know your rainfall maximum, a 3-foot diameter, a 3-inch diameter pipe will drain 2,500 square feet at 1/8 of an inch slope. And if you can just drop that slope 1/8 of an inch more, you get a lot more volume that you can drain. Most residential users, a 3-inch pipe is fine to take it from a 2,000 to 3,000 square foot roof down to your tank or your assemblage of tanks, whatever you have. I've only gone to 4-inch pipes when I've done barns where there's 6,000 and 8,000 square feet of roof that we're collecting water from. And there's that complicated chart again. Okay, tanks. So this is about siting. Now most tanks are above ground because it's easy. You can have access to wooden tanks. The rain barrels are an above ground tank system. These are wall tanks that you can get from a company called Bushman if you live in an area where you want to have things tied up against your building so the fire department can still get through the side yard to get to the backyard. That's kind of a code requirement in places like Ashland where they have a rainwater ordinance. If you could find someone to build one of these for you, there are ferro cement tanks. They're very common down in Northern California. And then the most common system that we see today is a plastic tank of some kind. And there's a lot of different kinds. So below decks is a great place for above ground tanks because they're concealed, they're protected from UV radiation, and you can access them through a hatch in the deck. And then below patios, you can bury below ground tanks. These are concrete, actually concrete water tanks that people who normally have for their well water. You can buy these from Copeland Sand and Gravel in Grants Pass. Last time I bought a bunch of these, they were like $1,800 a piece for 2,000 gallon tank, which this is a while ago. I think they're probably up. But what you see here is just the tops of the tanks are exposed, and client, I'm told that they will watch the fireworks. This is on Pioneer Road. Watch the fireworks in Medford on July 4th from their deck. Underground tanks are generally a little more expensive because they're ribbed to resist the pressure of earth pressing against the tank when it's empty. And then you have ferrocement tanks. These are the Copeland Sand and Gravel tanks. Some of us have ferrocement tanks that are custom built, but the labor that goes into them is extraordinary. So I didn't even put pictures of one in here. Steel tanks are a great option. They're the most expensive tank most people get today, but they last for a very long time. They almost all need a concrete pad. You can go from 5 to 100,000 gallons in size easily. They're $3.50 a gallon to install, and the manufacturers almost always send out the crew to install them. So you're paying for a laborer plus the materials plus the concrete, and anything over 30,000 gallons has to be engineered. So I've only done one steel tank system of the 70 I've worked on, because they're just at the very high end of the scale, but they're a great option because they don't deteriorate, they're kind of fire resistant. It's a great system. But since most people use plastic tanks, we're going to talk about the anatomy of a plastic tank. We're looking at a way to get in and out called a manway or access hatch. All of them are vented today so that as water fills up the air, the tank doesn't start to bulge because the pressure of the air is pressing against it. They just exhaust. The inlets are almost always 1.5 inches, outlets are 2 inches. There's usually no overflow. You have to drill that hole yourself. And they're almost always green or black because it inhibits things from growing inside. Now, yeah.
So if you're running a 3-inch conveyance with your gutter water and you get a 1.5 inch, I guess you split it and you run into 2 tanks, otherwise how are you?
That's called a bottleneck, and I saw a system just last week where someone had taken a 3-inch line down to a 1.5 inch line to get into their tank, and they were wondering why the water was overflowing at their gutter. And it's because it's a bottleneck, and so you have to make a bigger hole. It's really easy to do, but you just have to do it. Yeah. Okay, so these tanks, a 200 or 2,500 gallon tank weighs about 800 pounds, but they are round, so they roll. So if you have a couple of young people around to help you roll these up a hill or tip them into place, they're very flexible and maneuverable. And I think these run now these days. I think someone told me they bought a bunch of tanks for $2,000 a piece, 2,500 gallon, brand new. I see on Craigslist and other places you can get them like 2 for $1,000. Pick them up yourself. Tank pads. Like I said earlier, work has done all of my tank pads. They have to, wrong button. It's a good thing I was never an Air Force pilot because I'm sure I would have crashed and burned on my first flight. I'm always getting my left hand and my right hand screwed up. So a 2,500 gallon tank, when full, is very heavy. So you want to make sure that what you're sitting it on, either native soil, preferably you're building into a cliffside like I usually am with rocks everywhere, or you've compacted a couple, 3-4 inches of gravel. And you can also pour a concrete pad for these. The idea is you don't want them to shift, especially if they're linked to other tanks, because that could cause the connection between the tanks to break. Okay, so this shows you kind of a jury rig drawing I did from one of the books that I have. Your inlet pipe. I like to bring water down and turn it upward, especially in the first tank, because any debris that gets in the tank will be stirred up by water pouring from above. And that way, the cleaner water, if you have a floating pickup, which is optional, the cleaner water is in this column in this area. And then your overflow, I like to, what I call goose the system by adding an upturn in the overflow pipe. So I get a couple more inches of water out of that tank. And then your outlet goes to some point of use. And you would direct your overflow away from the base of the tank where it could erode your tank pad and cause the tank to tip one day. How you cut holes in plastic tanks is with one of these hole saws. Oh, don't want to obliterate that picture. That was a 3-inch piece of plywood that you screw into the plastic where you're going to be removing it anyway to guide the hole saw, because if you're guiding a hole saw into a hole, it wanders all over the place. So you want to have a clean cut there, otherwise your next picture, your bulkhead fitting won't fit. And a bulkhead fitting is threaded from the inside. There's the rubber washer that compresses against the inside of the tank when you turn this nut, which you do with this very sophisticated device, a plywood wrench.
So sorry, Jim, I didn't understand that last thing, when you were talking about the hole in the wood thing.
Yep.
Explain that a little bit for me.
Okay. If you're going to make a larger hole where there's already a hole, you take a piece of plywood that you've already cut with this cool hole saw, and you actually screw it right into what's going to one day be the waist. There was a little 2-inch hole right there at one point, and I screwed that plywood to what would eventually be the waist. See that part right there? You see the screw sticking out right there?
Yeah.
And that way you don't actually put a hole in your water tank that you then have to patch.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. It took me a while to figure this out. The first couple I did used a Sawzall, and it was a very, very ugly cut. They didn't teach me this when they taught me to be a rainwater collection designer. Okay. And then last picture I think here shows why you might want to have all these tanks. These are all linked together with a 3-inch pipe at the bottom. Okay, entering tanks. These are, according to OSHA, a confined space. So you need 2 ladders, one on the outside, one on the inside. That's what the one on the inside looks when they're up on top. On the downside, very easy to make. It's a single rung ladder or single rail ladder with rungs, 2x6, 2x4 screws. I make them tall enough so they can't accidentally slip out. And they're just, these manway covers are 22 inches wide. You want a young, small person to get in and out of these tanks. Better yet, don't get in the tanks. Do all this plumbing when they're on their side, and then roll them and tip them into position. But to clean out a tank, you actually have to get inside of it. Which, by the way, you don't have to do very often. I think I've been in 6 tanks to clean them out. It's very uncommon. Not enough stuff gets into them if you use those screening devices that I showed you earlier. So connecting tanks, we have options. Actually, I have a kind of a mock-up of a tank over there that has some of these in it. You want to use flexible connectors where possible, because in seismic area, your tanks might shift and wiggle, and PVC is very inflexible. It's going to crack and you could lose all your water. So having the tanks have something that flexes. Now this is spa hose, which I don't recommend anymore, because spa hose, unless it's a really warm day, the spa hose will become oval shaped, but the PVC fittings are round. And if you don't get them round and round, they don't seat very well. So you have to do this on a warm day, or don't use spa hose. Use Fernco fittings, these rubberized fittings, because the water's not pressurized, so it'll easily seal up really well. And I also like to have shut-off valves at each tank. So this could be July, August, September, October, November, and firefighting. Just helps you manage your water better. This whole thing can be buried up to 6 or 8 or 12 inches in soil or mulch, so you don't have any frost damage or foot traffic damage. But you wouldn't want to bury a plastic tank any higher than 12 inches, because it will cause the sides to collapse. So here are these flexible connectors. In this case, it was spa hose with the pipes unburied, and then we buried them. I think next slide is they get buried. Yes. You can see the overflow here hasn't been connected yet, and there it is right there. And it actually shoots out the side of a hill into a pond that Rourke built. So here's a schematic of the tank manifold. I always draw these up when I design a system. So water's coming in through a bulkhead fitting, which I had to add because they're usually always in the front. And then if I'm concerned that the 2-inch pipe leading out of it won't carry water during that 1.3 inch per hour storm event, I'll also add a tank overflow to the next tank. Another time this is handy is when someone is planning to refill their tanks from the water truck, and the guy comes out with the water truck and it's got this gigantic 4-inch hose and he puts it in there, and it's a column of 4 inches of water coming out in a hurry. Well, it's going to go into the top of the tank just fine, but all that water has to squeeze into this tank through the 2-inch opening, and it's not going to get there. So it's going to flow over out the port unless it has an access way or a way to get to the next tank over. So sometimes there's a tank overflow, especially if the inlet and outlet are different sizes. And then there's a systems overflow. And in this case, that had to be added and that had to be added. So bulkhead fittings had to be added to the system. Okay, how you get your water from your tank to your point of use, gravity feed would be ideal. And of the 70 jobs I've ever done, one of them was able to rely on gravity. Water comes from a barn, goes into a tank, point of use is 100 feet below where the water is. Perfect, because now we're at about 43 PSI, which is what most sprinklers and things operate at. And that was the only one. Everybody else has to have electricity or a pump or something to move the water from the tank to its point of use. And the common method is the shallow well pump, which I think is our, nope, we have gravity first. Gravity. This is only about 20 PSI they get, but it's just a garden hose watering some peach trees. There we go. Shallow well pump is really common. Where you have electricity, that pump in the bottom is, oops, you don't see it, there we go. This switch here, when it's floating upright, it tells the tank that it tells it, how do I say this? Actually, this is a surge tank. When this float is in the upright position, that means that the tank is full. When it's in the down position, it'd be ordering water, so to speak. And that's actually a surge tank, not a, well, I'll get into that in one of these new pictures here. So external pump and pressure tank is far and away the most common way we get water out of these tanks, and that's to have the water coming out underneath or through the side of the tank and into a pump house of some kind. And this is more classic, where you've got your barn roof, water coming down, filtered through a screening device, goes into the top of the tank. There's a first flush device that freezes all the time. And then the two tanks are connected at the bottom and then into the pump shed, which when you take that roof off looks like that. And you've got a pump, the pressure tank. There's a filter here because this is all for irrigation and they don't want debris plugging up their emitters. But we had to pull electricity to this location, and while we were there, we put in a water line.
110 or 220?
110, yeah. Most people don't realize that you don't need a lot of power. I mean, that's a half-horse pump. That might even be a quarter-horse pump. I've got a 27,000-gallon tank with a 80-gallon pressure tank and a half-horse pump on it. You don't need a lot of pressure or a lot of pump to pressurize.
In there, do they need a heat source, like a light bulb or something to keep things from freezing?
Wrong button.
Yeah.
So all that insulation keeps it pretty comfortable. I think, this is Jim and Marion's, I think they don't have a heat source. I do not think they have a heater in there, but they could easily because they've got power to that. Yeah, I mean, a light bulb would heat that little unit pretty easily. Okay, so for filtration coming out of the tank, you don't need filtration for most irrigation. You don't need it for flood irrigation for sure. You may need it for livestock. I did this presentation up in Newport a couple months ago, and somebody there who was a livestock person with the university said, horses are fussy. I had no idea that horses will be very particular about the water they drink. So you may need to filter it for horses. But for drip irrigation, I recommend an amide filter. And then if you're going to drink the water, you need to pull a permit. You need to get a plumber who knows what they're doing. And you need to have all these different filtration devices if you're using a permitted drinking system. I know a lot of people don't. I recommend that they do. At least have a coarse filter, micron filters, and then the UV light, because that kills the stuff that could be in your water supply and can make you sick. And even if your gut has adapted to what's in your water, the people who come visit you and drink your water may not have been adapted. A picture of an amide filter where once this valve is turned off, the water comes out of the tank, is pressurized, travels through here, turn that off, pull that out, and you can clean out the filter that's inside this device. It just unscrews and then put it back on. I clean it out once every 2 years. So overflow, one of the last parts of the process is where does the water go from tank to tank? And this is just a tank overflow. And then here's an image of that way that I try to get another 3.5 inches out of a tank, because that accounts for 100 gallons right there. By just taking an elbow and upturning it so that the water level right there, as opposed to right there. So there's the overflow on this system, and it travels down a hill, and the extra water that once this 500-gallon tank is filled, that water discharges into a rock basin where it's not going to cause any erosion. So safety issues?
Jim, most of those tanks that you purchase, they have an overflow.
They do not.
So
They only have a 1.5-inch hole at the top, and then they have the 2-inch hole at the bottom, and all the other holes you get to put in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But it's not. So safety issues. Call the dig hotline, or work will look at you and say, you want me to dig where? And I'm going to hit what? Do you know for sure? Tanks are confined spaces. Again, I said earlier, we'll follow OSHA guidelines. Preferably don't get in a tank unless it's on its side so you can crawl back out. But if you do, use a ladder. And then because they are attractive nuisances in some states, I don't know if Oregon has a case law on this, but don't leave a ladder leaning up against the tank because kids think that's really cool. You can also lock some tanks, or you can fabricate a way to lock the lids on them. I recommend it if you have a lot of kids in the neighborhood. In terms of labeling, you want to paint a purple stripe. You can buy a purple pipe, very expensive, or you can paint the purple stripe on tanks, spray can, and then always put a sign on it where water could be pulled out for drinking accidentally by a farm worker or by anybody who doesn't know that you've got a rainwater collection system. Just says, don't drink this. So maintenance is pretty straightforward. Keep the gutters clean if you're worried about it. The stainless steel gutters really don't collect much debris. Check your first flush if you have it periodically so it's not frozen and cracked and leaking water. Checking for leaks is a little harder to do unless you see water coming out of a gasket where the bulkhead fitting's not tight enough, perhaps. And then if it's for potable use, you have to do all these other things, a sanitary regime. You got to change your UV filter every 6 months, I think it is. It's complicated, but for people who have no choice, their well's dry, they want to live out in the country, rainwater is very sweet. It's one of the best kind of waters you can drink. So here we have just a bunch of pictures of some systems in the Rogue Valley. In this case, the system was installed, the house is up here on the hill, water comes down to it underground into the first tank, overflows into this one because the system's not large enough for them to get through an entire summer. So they bring in a truck that drops 2,000 gallons in this tank, which overflows into this one. But a few years after we installed that, I said, can you put 3 more in? And as long as they're the same height, roughly, they don't have to be the same brand. And those are all connected underground. So when this tank fills, it fills by the 2-inch pipe that connects all these tanks. Another system where somebody else installed these two, client asked if I could add 5,000 more gallons. We cut out this hillside, added some rock, compacted it, connected everything underground, so now they have a 10,000 gallon system. System in a picture, I'm familiar with this one, this is mine. They have roughly 6,000 square feet of shop, garage, barn, solar shed house that drains. Now, Rube Goldberg is my design partner. And there's a surge tank in the garden, so the water flows down into the garden where it's pumped back up to this 27,000 gallon tank where it then gets pumped back to here. And I don't always consult with Rube Goldberg, but unfortunately the way topography is and where people put their houses and where they want to use their water, you oftentimes have to have things go down before they can go up and then they have to pump back. It's just the reality of the design. Like Karen said, there's no standard way to do gray water. I've never seen the same rainwater catchment system twice, which makes it fun. So here is that system we saw earlier. Those are tuning can tanks. Those are each 5,000 gallons. And that barge fills them in a wet year. And it wasn't enough, so the same property, we're pulling water off the house now into another 10,000 gallons, but since all of the infrastructure, the electrical, the plumbing, everything's to this tank set up, they said, well, how about if we just use a portable pump to then pull the water from here to there when those tanks are empty. So sometime in August, when those tanks are empty, they just spend a day with a portable pump and they pump all this water up into those tanks where it takes advantage of the pump and the electrical that they have there.
What were they using the water for?
Irrigation. This is all irrigation. They've got a very tiny lawn. Have you been to Jim and Marion's place? They got a very tiny lawn. It's probably a tenth the size of this room. And then a whole bunch of garden, orchard, landscape stuff. Yes, sir.
So am I understanding you right that because this is rainwater catchment off the roof that you can irrigate without water right?
If it comes off of a roof and you put it in a tank, you can do anything with it. You can swim in it. I do in my cistern all the time on a hot day. Yeah, you can do anything with it. Yep.
And your cistern being so big, it's concrete or what?
It is concrete. And a lot of effort to keep it from leaking, which is why they're not that popular here. Okay, so here we saw that system earlier, drains water from a roof. The screening device at the top is what keeps the asphalt shingles from leaching into the water in terms of a lot of particulate. Still get a little bit. First flush right here. Once that's full, it bypasses into the tank. Once that's full, it bypasses and goes down into the bottom of the yard where there's a rock well, and this is set up so that they could add 6 or 7 more 500-gallon tanks if they ever wanted to. System I worked on in Bedford, they already had collected rainwater, but they wanted to someday add more, and they were worried about these 1-inch pipes freezing because it's easy to do on a cold December, January day in Bedford. So water fills up these tanks. They could one day add more cinder blocks around the corner here by the chimney, and add 4 more of these tanks. And all the water, once it flows in here, would just fill all of these up together. But the way we got around the freezing problem was with this T-handled valve on-off turner. So the valve is inside the tank, which is 35, 40 gallons is not going to freeze solid in the winter here. So by turning these off and then draining the system on a cold, cold day, they don't have to worry about their pipes freezing. But I do this a lot. Those concrete tanks you saw on the ground earlier, the on-off valves are open the hatch, reach down with that T handle, and turn the valve. It's inside, it's protected, it's not going to freeze. It's just not as easy to turn as if it's exposed. A system I did up near Elk Creek. This is a potable water collection system. Concrete pad was required at the time, it no longer is. But you can see the 3-inch pipe draining the gutter, which was on a steel pole bar, didn't have fixtures, so we had to add the fascia before they put the gutter on. First flush device comes in, and then they were building a pump shed to push the water through to a UV filtration system because they only had I think 2 gallons per minute is their well. They wanted to have a better source of water. And I think my last one is, this was on Thompson Creek. This is Barbara's. Barbara's here still? Nope, Barbara Chastain's project, where she wanted to have water for her horses. She was tired of dragging 5-gallon buckets an eighth of a mile down the road on a wintry day. So we pulled water off of the 2 shed roofs on the barn and dropped it into this tank, which is kind of hiding in the shadows there. And there's the overflow. And the spigot is exactly the height of a 5-gallon bucket. So you can put it under there, fill it up, take it to the horses. And that is it. Any questions?
Costco has those easy screens for about $14 a foot. I did look that up.
It's a screaming deal. I've been installing them ever since I discovered them, but I know there are other manufacturers of that same kind of device.
That gives them an idea.
Yeah. It's I think they come in packs of 25 foot or 100 foot, but if you work directly with the manufacturer and you get, if you need 600 feet of it, like I often have them in stock, had them in stock when I was working, you get a bulk discount. So. Yes, sir.
Could I talk you into putting on slide number 2 on? It went so fast I wanted to photograph.
Might not be really a matter of whether I... You don't know who you're talking to. Slide number 2? That was way back at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, easy for you to say. This one right here.
Oh, no, it wasn't that one. It's the one about all the acre feet and how you measure, like, when you have
That one?
Yeah.
We will be sending out a link to all the presentations. And